Show, but we are live.
We're live. Let's go for it.
And so this is our first IVS
Yeah.
podcast episode with you, and we are here
It's the first
discussing.
one ever, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we haven't published anything,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm excited to get started.
Me too.
And this is a very opportune moment to start talking about Vaishnavism. That both you and I are academic, kind of experts in some people's eyes. I consider myself a lifelong student.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Me
but
too.
why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you've been, where you studied, what you do, and what your understanding and exposure to Hindu studies has been like. Then I'll tell a little bit about myself, and then we'll get straight into the big question that everybody's talking about at this point in history, which is the Ram Temple
Yeah.
coming up in Ayodhya, which is the birthplace of Ram in the epics,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been without controversy.
Right.
We see a lot of news channels talking about
Yeah.
it. We see a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah.
Various Hindu organizations in the United States are celebrating on 22nd of January, and they're bringing out rallies and things like that. But I think it's a very opportune moment to kind of give a scholarly reflection to questions of history, philosophy, soteriology, that is kind of the process through which you become free from the fetters of this world. But before we get ahead of
Yeah.
ourselves, why don't we talk a little bit
I
about
don't.
your
I want to learn more about what your thoughts are on that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I got interested in Hinduism just broadly as a teen, like a late teen through Thoreau, Henry David
Mm.
Thoreau. That's my. People always ask me like, how did you get interested in Hinduism and the study of India? And that is my answer. Like I got interested through Henry David Thoreau. We had to read him in. I read him in Mr. Potts's. If he's out there, shout out to Mr. Potts. I think it was junior or senior year. I can't remember,
Huh.
but it was an English class, and he made us read Economy, the first chapter of Thoreau's Walden, his book
Huh.
Walden. And we did not like it. It's very difficult, dense reading, especially now for a high school student. I look back like, wow,
Mm.
that's a very difficult thing to assign to a high school student. But I'm really that book actually changed. I may not be sitting here talking about Vaishnavism had it not been for that assignment,
Mm.
because Thoreau introduced. He really. I read the book and I really realized I loved the written word. I
Right.
loved to read. I saw the power of the written word. Like it transported me back to this guy that lived in the 1850s and 1860s. He wrote this in the 1840s and 50s and died in I think in the 1860s. But the power of his words to pull me back. But he wrote about it. He had a lot to say about Hinduism,
Mm.
China, the Greeks. He got me interested in Hinduism, but also sort of the ancient world
Mm.
and ancient philosophy and that ancient world of ideas.
Mm.
Then after I read that, I became very interested in Chinese philosophy and Greek philosophy and Indian philosophy. And as I went into college, by the time I got into college, it was again largely due to the people that were around me. I went to UC Santa Barbara in California, and they taught Sanskrit there, and there were scholars there. Barbara Holdridge was teaching Vaishnavism,
Mm.
and so it kind of same kind of it was kind of drawn into it. I had a personal interest in Vaishnavism at the time, but the scholarly side of it was really fed by the people I was introduced to and the people that I could study around me.
So it was
Yeah.
mostly textual and academic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had a personal interest in it as well, but I began to develop a kind of scholarly career around
Hmm.
the texts and the ideas, and I was interested in exploring the philosophies more. And now I'm doing kind of comparative religion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my whole
Yeah.
journey has been from the other end of the spectrum.
Right, because you grew up in
I grew up
in the
in
culture.
yeah, I grew up in Calcutta mostly, a very few years in Bombay, and I still remember exactly at 5 a.m. in the morning, there was a betel nut shop right under my window that would start playing Ram Sita Ram full blast, full volume, right? And that would wake the whole neighborhood up.
Right.
And as much as I appreciated the piety, it was very difficult to kind of get out of bed because you couldn't sleep anymore.
Oh, I know. No, I lived in Vrindavan. I remember they would get going at like 2 in the morning.
Right.
They do these live performances, and you'd be like, it's so pious,
Right.
but I also want to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. And then, my journey kind of took a turn when somebody told me that you could actually study this stuff at a university and get paid for it.
Yeah.
Like, wait, what?
Yeah. No, I agree.
And
No, that was a turning point. Yeah.
religious studies as a discipline of, as an academic discipline doesn't quite exist in the same form that we have it in the Western world.
Yeah.
And so, I remember in 1992, 6th of December, there were riots in my city.
Hmm.
And the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, was new.
Mm.
And we had just gotten our cable TV. And we saw this image of a mosque getting torn down. And
That was the one in Ayodhya.
that's correct.
Right.
And right then it was I had read the Ramayana.
Mm.
My grandma had told me stories of Rama, but I never felt the presence of Ram in a real kind of everyday way outside of a temple where
Because it was mainly Krishna bhakti in Bengal, right?
it was not even that. It was a mishmash of everything.
You were not. So your childhood was not like
the
pure Krishna bhakti.
Jagannath was the household deity. It's a form of Krishna, right? And practically all 4 of my grandparents have Vaishnava roots.
Right.
And so they were Gaudiya Vaishnava, which is a particular form of Vaishnavism from Bengal.
Yeah.
It skipped a generation. My parents weren't interested in that stuff.
Hmm.
But my dad had a very busy corporate career.
Yeah.
My mother was a businesswoman.
Hmm.
And so my grandparents raised me, and that's where I got it from.
Right.
Right?
And she was Gaudiya Vaishnava.
They were
Pure Gaudiya.
Yeah. And not the ISKCON style of Gaudiya Vaishnava, which is very kind of Protestant, kind of
I get
very,
it,
new kind. But it was, you observe the festivals and you have kirtans, and, I was given Harinam, which is, kind of initiation into meditation. When I was 5 years old, I didn't even know what was going on, right? It's a weird way of counting on your fingers, and you have a mantra in your right ear. Whatever that meant.
Yeah, it's a set. I mean, in the West, there's you get baptized. I was
I know.
baptized.
I know.
I don't have no memory of it, of course. but then you get confirmed. You
Right.
go through different processes.
Right.
But you're young. You
So
don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah, it was a rite of passage.
Yeah.
And then I still remember my brother was 5 months old, and my birthday was coming up. It was 10th birthday was coming up, and then suddenly there was curfew on the streets, and you weren't allowed to go out. And I didn't know what was going on, and that's for the first time I learned that hey, religion can play such an important role in society that could either enhance or disrupt people's lives. Because we had, the Ramakrishna Mission, they were doing a great job in Calcutta taking care of people who were underprivileged. We had missionaries. Mother Teresa was still alive. She passed in 1997, right? And I kind of saw this multi-faith ambience in my Catholic school. We had Muslim kids studying with Catholic kids and Hindu kids and Sikh
Mm.
kids, right?
So you were in a Catholic school at the
I was in a
time.
Catholic school,
Yeah.
right? So I
But why did they shut? So we're talking. I mean, this is when the temple is being destroyed.
the mosque was
the
destroyed.
mosque is being destroyed,
Yeah,
and there's riots going on.
there are riots going on, and
in
that's
Ayodhya. This is what? How far is
This
Ayodhya
is-
from Bengal? Like at least 1,000 miles, right?
well, I'm not sure
800
about the
miles.
exact distance, but it's another state quite far away. I mean, if you were
Yeah.
looking at the United States, it would be like Illinois to New Hampshire, right? It's pretty
800 miles possibly.
pretty
yeah.
pretty far from
Yeah.
each other, but um, religion became an important part of our lives.
Yeah.
In a very real way. It was on
How
the
long did they
newspapers.
shut the?
I think about 7 days or 5 days or
Really?
something. Is things shut down, and
Wow.
we started making jokes about it because when you went out on the street, you had to have your arms up to show that you're not carrying any weapons.
Really?
And they used to say you are in a Gauranga pose. You suddenly become de
So you had
facto,
to
like-
walk around the streets like this
I didn't go out, but those who went out had to, they had
for
to,
7 days.
yeah. And they would open the markets for an hour between 10 and 11 a.m. You'd just go buy whatever you needed and just get back in. You couldn't go out on the streets. Schools were closed, businesses were closed. There were, kind of paramilitary patrols on the streets. And we just kept watching the news. And, it disrupted
So
all our
no
lives.
school? You weren't going
No,
to
no,
school?
no.
Wow.
And only when I started looking deeper into it, I realized that
Wow.
India is such a big country where religion plays such an important role. And there is the practice of religion, but there is also the possibility of studying human religiosity, right? Which we call the academic study of religion in the West. But in India, it's done in sociology department, in language departments, right? And so you don't have this phenomena of religious studies. And so when somebody told me you can actually do that, it was like, whoa, a new dimension.
So that was really when you decided you wanted to study religion. Was it?
that was the turning point.
Wow. Okay.
And I get we met at Oxford. I guess it's been what 2005, so 19.
No, we actually met in Mayapur before that.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
You came to India, so it's been what
Mhm.
20 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. It was probably.
Yeah.
Probably. At least 20 years ago.
That's time flies.
Yeah.
But fast forward, here we are today in
Yeah.
2024.
So tell me about what's going on now. So we've got when this was, you said 1993, when
1992,
1992.
6th of December.
6th of December, 1992.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way I look at it is, I've never been to Ayodhya. I hope to go there one day. In the texts I read, like the Chaitanya Bhagavat, which were a staple in the Gaudiya community, you had a figurehead, the guru of the whole movement, Nityananda Prabhu, go to Ayodhya and cry profusely.
Mm-hmm.
He is distraught at something.
Hmm.
The text doesn't say what he's distraught
Oh, really?
with.
You think it was the mosque?
We don't know. Or maybe it was a dilapidated temple, or there was nothing there. We don't
Right.
know, right?
Right.
And over the years, I heard something very interesting from one of my teachers at Chicago, the University of Chicago, that in 1857 or between 1857 and 1870s, right, when the British government took over, after the First War of Independence, the British called it Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. When they took over, that's where the first litigation between Hindus and Muslims began with the Babri Mosque.
Mm.
And what I heard from one of my teachers is that Hindus and Muslims were going in there, and everybody knew it was the birth site of Ram, but there was the physical structure of a mosque, and it wasn't that it was a very busy mosque. Right? But then the British tried to play fair and made railings to separate the Hindu and Muslim crowds. and left more space for the
So it's
Hindu.
the British fault.
So
So
it's
the
I'm not
Britishers.
saying it's I'm not pointing fingers, but I'm saying that this is what I heard, that they left more space for the Hindus, and the Muslims felt that, hey, this is a mosque and we are being discriminated against,
Right.
right? That's where the lawsuit started, and in the 18 like the late 19th century. And then I saw little bits of that lawsuit getting resolved, and it went up to the Supreme Court. And I have friends who were
Yeah.
a part of that suit, and I got news. And for an average civilian who just studies Bengali Vaishnavism broadly and identifies as the Vaishnava, it was very interesting.
Yeah, I've never been to Ayodhya either, by the way. I've not seen it, but I have been to Krishna Janmastan
At Mathura.
in Mathura.
Right.
Yeah, it's a similar situation.
Yeah.
There's the temple that commemorates the birthplace of Krishna, but then there's a huge mosque
Right next to it. And I've been there.
on top of it. It's on top of the birthplace. You have to go kind of underneath the mosque, and it's like you go an underground
Yeah, and
cavernous
that's
type
yeah,
of
and
situation.
I've been to the temple.
Yeah.
It was built in the mid 20th century. Right.
Yeah, it's
And
a new temple. Yeah.
It's a fairly new temple.
Yeah.
But just
And the mosque is what, a couple hundred years old?
maybe a
now?
little more,
Yeah.
a little more.
But it was a tense situation.
It was
And
very.
I was there, I guess, I've been there maybe 5 or 6 times, but probably the last time is over 15 years ago. But it was a tense situation. It was guarded. I didn't go in the mosque. It was guarded with guys with machine guns, and
Mhm.
there were a lot of people walking around with guns, and it was a highly controlled, tense environment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you look at the arguments from both sides,
Yeah.
the there is a whole there are two schools here really. The one
Yeah.
which says that Ram is a Hindu deity. This is Ram's birthplace. If you had Jesus'
Right.
birthplace and had a temple there, because at some point in history Hindus took over in the Middle East, is it fair? And therefore you need to have a temple there. On the other
Yeah.
hand, you have this argument that there's already a historical structure. You don't tear down historical structures. It is a form of atavism, right? You want to go back to.
So you think
Yes.
they should not have torn down the
No,
mosque?
that's the other argument, that
Yeah.
you just keep the mosque there.
Yeah.
And nobody could resolve the problem. It could right now, many Hindus are very excited. The narrative is we awaited.
They're excited because the temples.
The temple is
the
coming
the
up.
Hindu temples.
The Ram temple.
It's been built, and so what's going on? It's been built,
It's been built.
and now this is they're opening it to the public. Is that what's going on?
And here's what's going on. We just had Makar Sankranti,
Yeah,
right, which is a major festival in North India.
yeah,
And so the consecration started from that day, and the Prana Pratishtha, the real consecration of the deity in the Sanctum Sanctorum, is going to happen on the 22nd
of January.
of January.
Yeah, and that's like the last day of.
No,
Makar
that's
Sankranti.
the thing. That's kind of the deity opens. They open the
But-
eyes of the deity
Okay,
and
all right.
give an abhishek.
Why then? Why did they choose that date, or is it just?
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
There are two reasons.
Yeah.
I've been digging this up.
Okay.
On the one hand, it is a whole series of festivities that is following Sankranti, and that happens to be the day
Okay.
where
It's getting to the end of Sankranti,
Yeah,
right?
it's a kind of peak of Sankranti.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the precursor to the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, was founded on January 22nd. Right?
Okay.
And
So it's a day before, or
no, it's on the same day.
same day. Same day.
Right?
Okay.
I think it was called the Janata Party,
Okay.
and formed by Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. That was on January 22nd.
Okay.
So.
So you think that there's a link between the opening of the
I
temple?
don't
and
know.
It's not.
I don't know. It's We don't know. We can't say.
It's a big. It would. Yeah. I mean, so those are the same days.
Yeah,
So it's
I
not-
you know, I'm a researcher. I was
Yeah.
looking up, like, you know,
Right.
why January 22nd, and
Yeah.
I don't have an answer.
Yeah. No, it makes.
But I saw that.
probably
hey,
more than just a coincidence, right? They
maybe.
didn't take out a.
And it's
a
not that I am
dark-
for or against the Ram Temple. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, whatever takes the country forward. Not everybody is going to, at the end of the day, feel happy with court judgments. That's just the nature of court judgments. Should secularism, the way it works in Western countries, be mimicked in its Indian context? That's a question that remains to be answered. We don't know. I mean, that's.
I mean,
something
I'd
we
like
could
to hear
think
more about why. So, before the British instituted this separation, you think it was peaceful? You think it was? Is that your idea?
The relations between Hindus and Muslims in India were more peaceful before the British came. There were periods of invasions. And, you know, there is a whole narrative that, you know, there was an Islamic invasion of India. And I think we gotta pause there and parse out. There were the Turks who came, there were the Afghans who came, there were
Right.
the Mughals who came. Their religion was Islam, right? Many of the kings who came there just looted and went back.
Didn't they destroy like one
They
of the
destroyed a lot of
the
temples.
university, like the
They
Buddhist
destroyed universities. They
that
you know,
massive
burned.
was it Tuxila
bu-
or
yeah,
what do they?
yeah, and they burned stuff down, and it was horrific.
And I mean, didn't they give the Gaudias a lot of trouble
They
too?
they gave
Aurangzeb, you know, they had to.
they gave and here's
Didn't
the here's
Deshika have to like pack up all his
books and
and
run.
and run because Vedanta Deshika had he was like that's the way they depict him, like grabbing his manuscripts and heading for the hills.
At the same time,
So that's those are more than
yeah.
a few
Absolutely.
examples. And-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm saying just to give a blanket Islamic invasion of India, it doesn't look into the nuance, because there were a lot of Muslims who were fighting among each other. Like Sher Shah Suri came for 5 years and he instituted the Grand Trunk Road, which was the largest trade route between Kabul and Calcutta. Right? He, you know, I mean, they did things, and then the Mughals took over.
So your problems with the word invasion?
No, the invasion happened,
Yeah.
but it wasn't necessarily an Islamic invasion. It was Turkish invasion. It was, you know, Mughal invasion. There was all kinds of invasions, and sometimes these Muslim groups who were invading India were also fighting among each other, even though
Right.
they were both Muslims.
Okay, so we don't say like the Anglican Church invaded India.
Exactly.
We say the British.
The British invaded
We
India.
don't say we say Alexander the Great, a Greek man, invaded
From Macedonia.
from a Macedonian. We don't say the Greek religion,
Exactly.
whatever that would have been.
And so and
Okay,
so and
you want to reframe it as a kind of
I'm thinking about that. You know.
national, not national. What would you call it? Ethnic.
Yeah, there
or,
was. I mean, there was a strong.
linguistic.
There was a strong religious
Yeah.
component to it. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, the Abrahamic traditions produced a lot of iconoclasts, and they've destroyed a lot of beautiful Indian sculpture, art, religion, culture. You know, you name it. I went to this temple in Orissa called the Konark Temple, and I dug into the history. So many of the images were defaced; they were broken. The first time I went there. And I learned that the images were defaced by the Portuguese.
Catholics, probably. Yeah.
Right? Because we don't know. But, you know, their idea was that, you know, it's graven images. Was there a religious motivation? Yeah, of course. Right? Was there a form of cultural superiority complex? Yes, of course. Right? But
Yeah.
you don't call it the Catholic invasion of India. Or you don't call it even the Catholic invasion of Orissa. The Portuguese were there.
We do talk about Catholic missionaries
Yes, that's there.
going to India, China,
That's there.
South America.
That's there.
Yeah.
But just as you said, we don't say the Anglican Church invaded
Right.
India, right?
Right.
Or Christianity invaded India.
Right.
Yes.
The Christian invasion.
I mean, think about it. The Dutch were there, the French were there, the Portuguese were there, and the
Right.
British were there. and they were all Christians of
Right.
different stripes,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And many of them wouldn't even talk to each other. When the British
Right.
first
They
came,
had as much problems with each other.
exactly,
Right.
they were the Catholics and the Baptists, and they wouldn't
yeah.
like each other.
Yeah.
And then the Unitarians came to Calcutta. So the deeper
Yeah,
you
it's a
go,
good point. Yeah.
deeper you go into history, you realize that it's not that black and white,
Right.
right? So, is
So
it
who were the people that? What do you know? The group that built the mosque?
Babur? Babur, who was one of the founders.
Where was
of
he
the
from?
Mughal, he was a Mughal.
He was a Mughal. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is during the Mughal period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the earliest Mughal.
Yeah.
And if you look at his biography, Babur Nama, you see that he wasn't the kindest person on earth. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you expect from a looter?
So why did he? I don't want to draw like. There's obviously stuff going on in Israel right now too,
but
and it's a similar. There's a similar dynamic there.
Very-
There's a sense of Israel. The Jews feel like there's an entitlement. Some Jews feel like there's an entitlement to that land, that the Muslims come in after they were entitled to that land, and some people feel that even though the Muslims come in after, nevertheless, since they've been there for so long, they're part of the sort of religious and political and social economy of the place, and they have just as much entitlement to the space as the Jews
Yeah.
do. So, isn't there a similar dynamic here? It's like
No, I
obviously
think,
Islam. So
I think
when was
it's-
this temple? When was the mosque built? What
the
year?
mosque was
We're-
built in the 1500s.
So we're talking. So Ayodhya had been a holy site for
For much longer.
at least a millennia, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how long.
But there
a
is
long
no,
time, right?
but there is no evidence that Babur tore down a temple and built a mosque.
Okay.
The Archaeological Survey of India went in, and they
That was a controversy for a long time, right?
Yes.
When I was reading about this, that
and
was
and the archaeologist who went in was a Muslim,
yeah.
and he brought out this evidence which said, "Hey, there was a temple here, right?" And that's all fair and square.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you expect? But did Babur tear down a round temple and build a mosque? We don't know.
Right.
Is it likely he did it? Maybe. We can't know. So I think
And there's enough space there, I would assume, to have multiple places. Like as I said, I've been to Janmastan, and where Krishna's birthplace in Mathura,
yeah,
and there's enough space. I mean, it's crowded,
yeah,
but there's a Hindu temple, there's a mosque,
and right.
and it's a busy, vibrant area, but there's a lot of people, but there's space for both. I mean,
Yeah, and when the court came up with its first judgment, they divided the land between Hindus, Muslims, and a secular group that was supposed to use that land for charitable purposes. That judgment didn't go down very well with any of the parties, right? And there were second judgments, so on and so forth. I don't want to get into the legal complications, and I'm not an expert, I must admit. I'm talking more about it more from the like in the broad historical perspective, and thinking about questions like history and memory, for example, right? There is memory, among people that, hey, this is a spot where Ram was born, a mosque stood, that mosque represented, years or centuries of, call it Islamic domination of India, because, Turkish mosque and dress and culture is different from Mughal culture, dress, so and so forth. But the lowest common denominator there is Islam.
Yeah.
And
Totally, it's a symbol. It's not
Yes.
about the space. There's
It's-
enough room.
it's so
It's an image of
Yeah.
some other thing.
yeah.
that-
So
yeah.
when I had the chance to think about it, what I got out of the narrative was that it is, people were going down and tearing down a mosque because it was generational retribution, right? That we as Indians have been
And you're talking about what you saw in the early 1990s.
early 90s,
Yeah.
and I think it is a consequence of history writing, which is a very European phenomena in India, given how itihasas are written, and we can talk about that a little bit, that itihasa doesn't necessarily translate into history. And the kind of history that we have, and the way of writing history, that is historiography, is very Rankian, right? It
Very what?
Rankian. It's a particular, Ranka is this European thinker from which this.
Ranka? I don't know.
Yeah, we can get into it.
Yeah,
But that chronology, that this happened after this happened after this kind
Right.
of causality exists, right? Is very important in European history, whereas
Yeah.
itihasa is very different. It doesn't matter which century, which year Ram was born. What matters is what he went through in life. And there is a great book I read
It
by.
doesn't it matter? I mean, this is a huge topic,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
But doesn't it matter in some way? I mean, they there
It
is
matters
the whole,
in broad strokes, like there's Satya Yuga, Treta
Well, that's-
Yuga,
that's what I'm
Dwapara
saying.
Yuga, and Kali Yuga.
and they're very. These yugas are very precisely defined. I mean, they're bigger time spaces for sure.
absolutely, absolutely.
Right. I mean, it's like we're in the year 2024.
Right.
Right. That's
right. That's Anno Domini. That's we
Right,
could call it Common Era, but
right. That's such a small chunk of time from an
that's
Indian
right.
point
That's,
of view.
that's absolutely right.
Right. I mean, the Kali Yuga is the shortest
That's
of
absolutely
yugas,
right.
and what's it?
432,000 years.
432,000 years.
Right.
And that's the short one.
That's very
Right.
you're absolutely right. But
Right.
what I'm saying is that in Western history you would say the Anglo-Saxon battle was fought in 1060 CE, and here is the record, and you have museums
Right.
where I think
We have very good records.
Yeah.
We know so
in
much.
the Western world.
in the Western world, yeah.
In the Indian case, first of all, many libraries were burned down. Number two, they were oral traditions, and
Yeah.
when people are mass slaughtered, you lose these traditions. And number three, the narrations that survived tell us that kind of record keeping and chronology was less important. It was important, but
I agree.
it
I
was
mean,
less important than the life lessons you learn from Rama.
Right, and dating texts, that's really, figuring out when something was written. That's really more of a Western Indological
Yeah,
project. That's something that it's a respectable thing to do, to try to figure out
yeah.
when was the Yoga Sutra Bhashya, the
Exactly.
commentary. When
And-
was that written? That's
and
like a
ex-
really
exactly.
good. If you can come up with an answer to that, you're
You're a good scholar.
You're definitely getting tenure, right?
And
But
so-
that's not a question on the mind
Not
at
on the-
all
no.
of a yogi.
no, exactly. And
Yeah.
in the 19th century, one of the architects of modern India, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee,
Yeah.
said that India needs to have her own history. We don't write history.
Right.
We don't do science the way Europeans do,
Right.
right? A yogi would be so satisfied going on a mountaintop and say, "Hey, the air here feels lighter." They wouldn't go up and try to use a barometer.
Right.
And so this kind of
There are histories though, but it's a different form of history. I mean,
exactly.
like the Bhagavata, Bhagavata Purana, which I've worked on, it does give a kind of history. There's the Vedic
there is chronology.
period. They recognize that that's something, an older layer, and then there's something, the Upanishadic period. They do recognize, and then there's bhaktis come, and it's a bit of a new thing that needs to be justified. So there is
yeah, absolutely.
there's a broad stroke, but they're not sitting there saying like, well, when
This year and here's
exactly
the
was the
evidence.
Rig Veda written? It's
Right.
like, what region exactly is it from?
Exactly.
And let's really think about. Let's try to really nail down a tight date for the Shatapatha Brahmana or something like that. Within. But they might give a broad stroke. Historical narrative.
And the other thing is, there are many calendars, right? In the Western world,
Right.
we have standardized a Christian calendar, right? It's first the Julian calendar, then the Gregorian one.
It's the calendar.
It's the calendar.
Right.
Whereas in India, you have the Vikram Samvat.
Right.
You have all the regional calendars.
So many calendars. You have to learn so many, just to do basic work on India.
Exactly.
You have to learn at least 3 or 4 calendars, right?
Exactly. And so
And then the Gaudiyas have their own calendar.
the Gaudiyas have their own calendar, the Chaitanyabda.
The Chaitanyabda. It's like you have to figure out what that date is. If you're reading Gaudiya texts, they got their own way of dating their stuff.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So my point was that yes, there is chronology, yes, there is history, but the way we narrate history in the Western context doesn't really translate into how ancient Indian sages, however you want to put it,
Yeah, I agree.
wanted to remember their past.
I agree. There's that finite, fine-grained, like what exactly, when were things dated, and then there's this bigger cosmological picture
Absolutely. And then,
that we don't have in the West.
yeah, and you
you
look
know.
at a simple text like the Bhagavad Gita, 100 years of Brahma, and when you start doing the calculation, it's so exponentially big.
Yeah.
We are actually very tiny speck in this universe, right? So it kind of
Right.
puts us in our place. Whereas Western history is, it takes gives a certain period of time, an agency that's much bigger than all of these cosmic histories that you get in religious texts, right? And so,
Right. I mean, the evolutionary perspective, humans about 100,000 years old, but civilization, culture, texts, not much more than 5,000 years old.
yeah,
And some people want to say, oh, Göbekli Tepe and the pyramids, let's push it back even before that. But that's not too well established. I mean, basically for us in the West, Homer, that's kind of ground zero for, and then the Hebrew Bible. But that's not that long ago from
that's
an
not
Indian
that long ago
perspective.
from the Indian perspective. No,
That's like nothing. That's a
No,
few
and-
thousand
and-
years.
and-
It's
and
like
so-
2,000 years. That's
exactly.
not even a blink of Brahma's eye, right?
And so from that vantage point, when you think of the birth of Ram,
Yeah,
right, it's way before Alexander.
way before, right? When is Ram? Like
Ram is
middle
considered-
of the third yuga, right, or the
Yeah,
beginning of the third
the
yuga,
Treta Yuga,
The-
the
the
second
Treta-
Yuga.
end of the second yuga, beginning of the third.
Yeah,
So that's
and so as I said, there is history and then there is memory,
yeah.
and in the
That's over millions of years ago, right? We could figure it out, but it's
we could. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it's-
could. There are different calculations for
Yeah.
that.
but it's well over. What is the third yuga? It's about 1.5 million.
I'm very bad at math.
years. It's getting close to 2 million years back,
Yeah.
right?
But here's the point. So the narrative that we grew up with is that hey, India is this land that
So you really grew up with that picture of like, hey, Ram, yeah, he lived about 2 million years ago,
somewhere and not too far away.
not too far
Right?
away,
You could take the train there, and now there is an airport.
right?
But-
About 2 million years ago and not too far away.
Not too far away.
Yeah.
But then
So you really were. That was your.
that was what we grew up with.
That's
Krishna was
your
born in
perspective.
Mathura, and Ram was
Right.
born in Ayodhya, and Chaitanya was born
Krishna was about 5,000 years
about
ago,
5,000 years ago.
and he was even not farther. He was even closer.
Right, and in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, Krishna is also sometimes called Rama, because one in whom yogis delight, right? Yogino Ramante Yasmin Sarama. Right? So the one in whom
Okay.
yogis delight is Rama, and so Radha calls Krishna Ramana or Rama, and so the Mahamantra Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. So Ram could mean both Ramachandra, the incarnation of Vishnu that appears before Krishna, or it could mean Krishna too. And so now you have a certain rich hermeneutic, right, which says that here's where they were born. They are both Vishnu, right? On earth, God walked among humans, and that was his birth site. And this was way before Babur came in. And why shouldn't we as Hindus have a piece of architecture that looks and feels more comfortable to us than a mosque which represents a foreign culture, except the counter argument is, well, these people who came from the outside, some of them looted and left, but there are the others like Babur who stayed back, and they used the wealth of India to make these things. And so those who stayed back should be considered Indians, right? And it's only before the British, you gotta, and that's where you get into a slippery slope when you don't have an answer, right? And then what happens is
So let me just.
yeah, let's parse this out.
Yeah, what exactly the British? So your claim is that
Not my claim. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that the popular imagination.
is that they started to look at this from a legal point of view.
Yeah, first of all,
This is there's property rights that we're talking about
yeah,
here, entitlements,
and not just that,
there's common law that we have to apply to this particular.
There is also something called debutter property. Debutter is an anglicized version of devattara, which is a Sanskrit word, where a property belongs to the deity of the temple.
Okay.
And in the Indian legal system, this predates the British by a long time.
And the British accepted this.
And the British accepted
Yeah.
this, that the deity of a temple is the legal owner of the property.
Okay.
A lawyer can represent the deity in a court as if the deity is a minor.
That's interesting.
and
That's an interesting
the
idea.
deity that is being installed in the new Rama temple is Ramalala, which is baby Ram,
So really a minor.
really a minor, right?
Yeah.
And they said, no, this is not a place where you have Sita and Lakshman and Hanuman, which is not Ram Darbar. This is the birthplace of Ram, and you treat Ram as a little young child.
How does the deity retain the attorney? Right. If I have
So the trust is what
the temple trust.
Yeah, the temple trust owns the land, the deity is the owner, and the lawyer represents the deity in the court.
Okay, so the trust would retain the attorney.
Exactly.
Right.
Right? And if you look at the context in which all of this develops, 1757, you have the Battle of Polashi. That's where Lord Clive of the East India Company plays tricks. He bribes Mir Zafar, who kind of defects and backstabs Siraj-ud-Dawla, and that's where the British really established their presence in India. So from I think 1757 to 1857, exactly 100 years, it's the Company Raj, a private company, East India Company, rules a subcontinent with its own private army, gathered from among Indians,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And this extended all the way up into Ayodhya.
1857. 1857 is when,
And this was where from Bengal? Oh, this was
though it's all over India.
most of North
this
India,
is,
right?
This is the
And
East. This is the
including
East India Company,
Ayodhya.
including
Yeah.
Ayodhya.
Yeah.
And in 1857, when this rebellion, First War of Independence, what the British called at that point the Sepoy Mutiny, and I dislike that word, but whatever it is, happened. That's when you have a transfer of power from the company to the crown. And Queen Victoria writes a proclamation.
In 1857.
Yes.
Yeah.
Saying that, she writes very sweet words, and now India is a part that is directly under the Queen of England and not a company property anymore. And for the next 90 years, you saw, the evolution of all these Western institutions in India, including the court justice systems and so on and so forth. And the first round of lawsuits were filed right after the
Okay.
the
Here's a question.
yeah.
Okay. So there's two possibilities here. I want to hear what you have to say about it. One is a charitable view that the court cases were brought to the British court because there was a problem, right? Generally speaking, in courts, cases are brought to the court. By the time they get to court, it means, generally speaking, that the parties have not been able to resolve the issue on their own, right? Maybe lawyers get together, the lawyers from the opposing party try to resolve it outside of court. If it can't be resolved outside of court, then it has the opportunity to go to the court. The court may kick it back and say, no, you guys got to solve this on your own. This is not a court issue. But the court has the right, generally speaking, not to hear certain cases. But if they do hear the case, it means the charitable view is if the court decided to hear these cases, rule on it, make a decision, implement that decision, it meant there was a problem there that was not resolvable
Yeah,
on its own. An uncharitable view would be, no, what the British did is they made a problem in order to divide and conquer, right? Let's separate these group of people. This will weaken them. If we can sow the seeds of dissension between the Hindus and the Muslims, that's going to weaken the fiber of the society so that we can more easily dominate, control, exploit them. That would be the uncharitable.
yeah,
view.
there's case after case after case after case after case where not just legal cases but historical government policies where the de facto step was to divide people up on lines of language, caste,
So you think it was more the
religion?
latter thing that I said? Yeah.
I absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
No, I mean, there is enough scholarship on this,
Yeah.
to keep us busy for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
But in 1905, the British suddenly divide Bengal because they think the Bengal presidency is too big, right? How do they divide it? On lines of religion, right? And so, you could say if you were charitable, that the path to hell is paved with great intentions.
Okay. Yeah.
But the
So-
reality of the situation is,
Even if you are charitable and say, well, there was a dispute over the properties, the courts hear the case, they make a ruling out of it. You could still say, well, yeah, they heard a case that was a problem, but the result of that, look at it, it's been problem after problem after problem, and it's still a problem.
it is still a problem. I mean, right now, as I said, there is a huge wave of some people are calling it the Hindu reawakening. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
it's
there is
pretty clear that that's going on.
there is something going on,
Yeah.
and the Ram Temple is kind of a it's kind of a crystallized version of kind of the precipitation that's happening in the Hindu world. And once that structure is there, you can't tear it down. But it also
or if
becomes,
you do tear it down,
you wouldn't want to, because
that would be a
huge disaster.
Yeah, it would
Would be a huge disaster.
It would only fuel these flames of
Exactly.
nationalism and Hindu,
Exactly. Exactly.
It would almost
But
be desirable, perhaps by some, because it would give
those who
a kind
want
of
to
justification for
those who want to sow seeds of dissent,
right,
those who want to create chaos and thrive,
right,
would think of something like that.
right. It's almost like I dare you to mess with this temple.
Yes.
You knock one stone off this thing.
Yes.
We've got
That's-
all the justification we need to. What's next?
Or not just justification, but also power.
Yeah.
Power, because and that's why
Well, they build the right to use that power.
and
yeah.
that's why I also raised the question on how do we think about secularism in India, where in a European country like Sweden, for example,
Yeah.
is one of the most secular countries, so to say. People who profess to belong to that Swedish church pay about 1% tax, and that goes to the church. It's a socialist state. In England, you have the Anglican Church, right, which is which kind of gets involved in the royal coronation and things like that. In America, you have so many denominations of Christianity, right? But there is this whole idea that you keep church and state separate from each other.
Right.
But that goes back to the influence of the Catholic Church on state affairs that turned out to be a disaster in Europe. Now, can we use the same model, the European model, and just blanket apply it in India? I don't think so, right? Indian secularism de facto has to look very different from Western secularisms. The big question is, by the time Nehru comes in, by the time Indira Gandhi comes in, secularism is in India looks very different from the kind of secularism Gandhi had, Mahatma Gandhi or Mohandas Gandhi.
There's clearly like many
Right.
different
And so
options,
there
yeah.
are and so secularism kind of takes its own life in India.
So what's your
My,
what are your vision? I mean,
my,
what's your vision of Indian secular? I mean, I assume you want some kind of secularism,
there has to be.
but it shouldn't. What you're saying shouldn't look like the British secularism, Catholic, European Catholic secularism.
That model doesn't work.
Or American.
for India.
What about American? Which is different than British. I mean,
Very different. I
very
think.
British
I think.
secularism.
I think. First
and Northern European. Many of the I found this out recently. Many of the European countries, taxes go to the Lutheran Church, one of the Protestant churches. So they are very secular, but you do pay tax. It's still you're a member of the church
right.
if you're a citizen, and you pay
Right.
taxes as a citizen. We don't do that
Right.
in the United States.
No.
So our secularism is very
It's very different.
from the-
And
I paid. I lived in England. I worked in England. I paid taxes to the.
No,
the crown, you
I
know.
think in secularism in India is, I think, dynamic. It's very much like process theology, and it kind of emerges as you go. But at the same time, it's coexistence has been in the DNA of Hinduism. We can't deny that. That when the second Jewish temple was, broken, Jews took refuge in India, and there are many Jewish communities that exist till
Christian
date.
oldest Christian communities
The
in the world. are-
the Zoroastrians from Iran
Yep.
fled and came to India, and you still see Parsi communities in Bombay, right? When
Buddhists,
the Dalai Lama,
is taking
India-
shelter there
exactly,
since what,
Dharma,
like 1950
1950
or something?
onwards.
Yeah.
So India has been a country that has historically, whether the British were there, whoever was there, right, has historically welcomed, right, these diverse groups and given them space to have their own identity, right?
Yeah. And you don't have, like in Europe, we had the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, then it breaks in, there's the Protestant, Lutheranism comes later, but Europe was a fairly, for a long period of time, there was the Catholic Church, and then in the East you had the Orthodox Church.
Right.
Whereas India has always had a lot of different groups and a lot of different subgroups. and-
India has been much more diverse religiously,
Yeah,
than Europe since at least the advent of Christianity.
right. And you didn't have an overarching religious and political authority that had an incredible amount of power, royal patronage, that spanned the whole of India.
Exactly.
For-
There were periods.
There were periods, but
There were the Maurya Empire and the Gupta Empire, and then
Right.
part.
but those were also kind of sections of India. It wasn't
Yeah.
what we call India today. It was right. It was
So the
the Guptas
India
and the Maurya's,
the
they had
India
certain-
today, interestingly, and I could go on, but I'll keep it brief. I saw a map drawn by the American Congress in 1835 that portrays India starting from Afghanistan,
Mhm.
going practically all the way to Burma,
Yeah.
right? And you see, different colors denoting different regions, but it's called Hindustan. And the Indian constitution says India, that is Bharat. So there is a recognition there that the inhabitants of this land, who's been here probably the longest time, called it Bharat. And the idea of Bharat, from the Mahabharata, there is Bharat in kind of many other ancient texts,
Right.
predates the advent of Christianity and Islam in
Yes.
India, and that's another kind of rationale behind and so the debate India had to face in 1947 when Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid-e-Azam, said that we need a Muslim country because we will never be given fair justice under the Hindus, right? And therefore they argued for Pakistan. Ambedkar was arguing for a separate electorate for the low caste people. Says, you can't.
Within India.
No, separate. And Gandhi went on a fast saying that, over my dead body.
Right. I mean, so India, we forget, it's really 1948, right? It's the concept of an Indian
The
nation
concept,
state.
exactly, the concept of an Indian nation state.
Right. And Israel, the same thing. It's a post World War II construction. And we forget that these were things. I mean, I don't want to bring in Israel all the time here, but
except the Indian Constitution talks about India that is Bharat. The Bharat that you have in the Indian Constitution
right.
isn't necessarily limited to the geographical boundaries of what is India. Right? For example, you have so many texts that talk about Bhutastan, which is Bhutan. You have pilgrimages like Manas Sarovar, which is integral to the idea of Bharat, but which lies outside of the borders of Bharat in China.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Of course,
so many of the Vaishnava pilgrimages are in Nepal and Bangladesh.
Of course, yeah.
Right? There are Shakti Pitas, the pilgrimages for Shaktas, and they are there in Pakistan.
Right. Panini, the great grammarian, he lived in what would be Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Today,
and,
as far as I know.
And I have spoken with many Muslim friends from Pakistan who've been through the Pakistani educational system that teach them that civilization began with Mahmud of Ghaznavi, whereas Indus Valley is actually within Pakistan today.
Sure.
Right? Most of it.
Yeah.
And so they don't necessarily trace their histories back to the Indus Valley, or now we have another archaeological site called the Mehrgarh, that brought up the Mehrgarh civilization, that is almost like 7000 BCE, right? Is the Neolithic period. And, so many of the textbooks, they don't trace back their roots. Yes, there are archaeological sites, but that's all like practically prehistory for those who consider the Islamization of India to be the beginning of civilization.
Okay, so we're in 1948, but you've got the formation of an Indian nation state in 1948, which does set boundaries.
Yeah.
And there are things that would be considered Bharata Bhumi, like the greater India, that definitely fall outside of that geographic area. But Indians now really, there does seem to be, with the formation of the nation state, a national consciousness, right? It's got to be there, right?
Yeah,
it has to follow from that, and that seems to be what's going on now. Is that India is developing a certain confidence in itself.
Here's where I think the narratives diverge. Right? The larger narrative is that most of India is Hindu.
Right.
And there has to be these identity markers that pull the nation together, right? At least the majority of the nations together. And Muslims have a part in India as much as Christians and Jews and Sikhs and Parsis and everybody else. So even though India, there's a whole argument that let's make India a Hindu nation because we don't have a Hindu homeland. I don't know what that's going to look like. Nobody's seen it, but if it happens, the idea is that all of these religions will continue to exist, right? It's not that only Hinduism is going to be the official state religion, right? But we think of a nation as, primarily based on Hindu values, and epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata becomes...
Yeah, but when we do that, everybody seems to do that. I mean, it's in the United States, most of the political class identify with Christianity or Judaism.
True, but there's also this
a
debate.
sense of when you talk to politicians, most, and it's certainly true in England as well, there's a real sense that to be a leader means to be a Christian leader in England and in the United States. It seems like a natural relationship that exists
Right.
in many places, and you know, why wouldn't India develop that kind of perspective? Is
Yes,
how
that's
should
the
it,
that's
how
the
should it not? How could it
that's
not?
that's
you
the
know?
question. And then what the bigger question that it throws to the rest of us as a challenge is that what about being inclusive? If you have a Ram temple where the prime minister goes and consecrates a deity, right? Where is the separation between church or state? My point is, well, India doesn't have a church, and European history is different, and
Right.
Indian secularism has to be different. But India has been following the British model of keeping religion and governance separate from each other, right? And we are seeing a shift in that. There are some people who are alarmed.
Yeah.
There are some people who think it's a great thing. I haven't formed my opinions yet, to be honest with you, right?
So what's India's path forward? It's got the stamp of British law on it.
Yeah.
It's a parliamentary style government. It's mainly British common law. It has been for at least since 1857.
Yeah,
So that's quite a long time.
that's a long time. Except
So it's a British style government, British style law,
British style education,
British
lot of-
education,
a lot of
right?
it
I
is-
mean, you need lawyers that
And-
are educated,
and
in,
English is still a national
and English
language.
is the main language for all of India. It's the
And so you
unifying language.
you can't get rid of that history.
No,
And so what's happening, I think, is that
and this is under self rule as well. I mean, India chose. They could have in 1948. They could have selected a different model of government. So
that's very true.
they chose that style. Because it was there. It was
But in 1947, India decided to become a secular, sovereign, socialist republic.
yes.
Nobody really defined what that secularism meant. It's still getting worked out. That's my
Right,
point.
and I think everybody's we're still working it out here too in the United
Exactly.
States. I mean, we're still trying to figure out what it means to be a secular government. It happens there all the time.
And Ram, Lord Ram, is becoming a very important deity because you have the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who comes and talks to his audiences, and he starts, and it's on YouTube. Just starts by saying Jai Shri Ram. For a lot of
Right.
people,
I mean, it's interesting. The British Prime Minister is an Indian fellow.
and we just had the Republican primary caucus, and
He's a Hindu, right?
the fourth
yeah.
guy who came up, Vivek Ramaswamy,
Yeah.
was
We've got a major contender for government right now. That's a Hindu.
Yeah, I mean he's dropped
He's
out.
dropped out. He has
Dropped out of the
yeah,
race.
Yeah.
But the word Kamala is a Hindu name, and Kamala Harris.
We've got
is,
some Sanskrit in the White House.
We've got some Sanskrit in the White House now.
Yeah.
Nikki Haley is a Punjabi of Indian descent,
Right.
right?
She's Sikh.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have the major American tech corps, Satya Nadella. He's a Telugu guy.
Yeah.
He's a Hindu. Then Sundar Pichai is a Hindu from India, right?
Yeah.
So you really have a time where Indians think or feel that their moment has come, and what is going to be the new Indian identity,
Yeah.
right? And I think that the building of the Ram temple in the minds of many Hindus is a decolonial and
No doubt. Yeah.
and it's a decolonial process. It's it's an act of decolonizing, and if I can create a couple of new words, demughalizing.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, it's a full circle, right? From what you experienced in 1992 to what's going to happen
Now.
at the end of this month.
Yeah.
It's the full circle. You had the destruction, and now you've got
Yeah.
the rebirth of the temple. So it's,
Except the big question that keeps getting thrown at everybody from time to time is, are the minorities feeling welcome, or are they becoming second class citizens in India?
Yeah.
And that debate, I don't think, can ever be resolved, because for a long time, Hindus felt that they were second class citizens.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other side of it, right? I mean,
And
and in some, I mean, all the stories we told when we started this conversation, I mean, they were some of them were second class citizens. I mean, they had to uproot themselves. They had to move their temples, their images.
well, that's all right. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were. I mean,
Yeah.
we've studied the Gaudiyas, and we
Yeah.
know that they had to deal with the power elite, which was the Muslims at the time, and they had to move their deities and their temples, and
But
they,
not always. Here's the thing.
not always. But I'm not saying always. I'm just saying it did happen.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, here's the thing. If you look at the red sandstone temples of Vrindavan,
Yeah.
that kind of architecture, that kind of material, showed that these are temples that are sanctioned by the state. They are not against the government,
Yeah.
right? So there were periods of Mughal rule where temples were supported,
I'm not saying they weren't. I'm just saying that there were moments where
and then there were moments.
where Hindus got the short end of the stick. They had to
Exactly.
run and flee, and
Exactly.
they died, and they were punished.
Exactly. And the Hindus felt that after, Mohandas Gandhi was very successful in bringing a lot of people together, and he alienated a lot more. But the Congress rule of India, which is starting with Nehru and all the way to Indira Gandhi, to an extent Rajiv Gandhi, and then this UPA 1 and 2, the big debate was, should we just focus on economic progress because that keeps the country together? The moment you bring up the question of religion, it divides people. Except now the narrative is, well, there was never a time where everybody was united. You only need to unite a majority. And now we have united a certain majority that was divided before, right? And that has led to a moment where Kashmir, that was the hotbed of contention for a long time, is no longer enjoys a special status. The Ram Mandir is there in Ayodhya, but the bigger question that leaves us, kind of wondering where this all is going, is that Ram is eternal. People will love Ram. People will chant the names of Ram. There will be hundreds of Rama temples, but even during the time of Ram, there were people who were bad mouthing him for Sita, and Ram had to take measures of sending Sita to the forest. And people are asking the question, why is this Ram temple coming up during election year? Right? Why is it on January 22nd? And I think those are questions I don't think we can
It's a bigger question for India. Not that we've mastered secularism in the West. I'm not saying that at all. But there is a sense in which our political leaders can identify with being Christian. Some do more than others.
Quite
right?
openly.
And quite openly, right? I mean, it's, Biden's very clear as a Catholic. It's not a closet issue. We've had political leaders that are the vice president under Trump's presidency was very openly, very devoutly religious. We've had presidents that were, very, very involved with their own personal churches and things like that. But we're also a very tolerant country. We allow any type of religiosity that people want. I guess the question is, can India have a robustly Hindu government that is also robustly protective and tolerant and interested in all kinds of different religious communities?
I think it's quite possible, and I also think it boils down to individuals, right? Overall, irrespective of who's in the government, India, that is Bharat, as a country, is very welcoming, very tolerant. People will stand up for each other, right? And people are smart enough to not take, anything for granted. And I think that's where there is hope.
So this is not. So the construction of the opening of this temple, which is going to happen next week, I guess.
This
right?
week, and
it's going to
it's
happen
in 3 days.
3 days. It's not the end of India. It's a beginning of a new possibility. It has the resources to draw on,
Yeah.
where it can be devoutly religious. I mean, India's always been deeply religious, but also deeply interested and tolerant of different religions. So
Not just tolerance. I would
but-
think tolerance. You tolerate somebody you don't like.
that's why I say interested and tolerant.
Not. I think it's more the future. I think is to introduce more religious literacy in India, where there is more mutual appreciation of each other's religions. And to be very honest with you, we need more Swami Vivekanandas and Prabhupads and Mother Teresa's who do good in the name of religion than Osama bin Laden's and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So religion can
Clearly.
overall be a force of great good if it is used as a force of great good, and that choice boils down to individuals and how they see humanity in all of us, how they see the
So I've got
collectivity
an
of
idea
life.
for the future.
Yes, what is it?
Let's do a great books of India. We should, right? I mean, one of the cornerstones of great universities in this country has been the West educate. That's been a theory. It started in Chicago, right?
Yeah,
This is
the
University
great
of
books.
Chicago. The
Yeah,
great
the
books.
great books.
The theory was, let's teach people about who we are. Let's display the diversity of our own civilization and culture through our literature, through our music,
And it's
through
already
our
happening.
architecture,
Yeah,
and so that we can learn about who we are through our history.
absolutely.
Maybe
And
India needs to do the same thing. And obviously Islam would be a huge part of that history.
Absolutely.
It would absolutely have to be one of the great books of India. Would have to be the Quran.
Yeah, I
It
think
would
India.
because it's been part of.
India has its own. Indian Muslims have their own unique understanding of the Quran, and Islam as a religion
It has
has
to be the
been-
Bible as well.
has been quite diverse, and we have, and we can probably finish with this, that when here is how Indian secularism works. It's like a cute incident. When Ram Mohan Roy, one of the first reformers, however you want to put it, polyglots, was recruited to translate the Bible, the Baptists who were in Srirampur expected that Ram Mohan would become Christian. Except Ram Mohan Roy converted one of those Baptists into Unitarianism. His name was, I think, Charles Adam, and the Baptists began to say that it was the second fall of Adam, right? And Ram Mohan Roy was also very instrumental in setting up the first Unitarian church in India. And he took the Bible and he said, this is the kind of Jesus I can accept. He cut out all of the, miracles and everything that didn't jive with him. And even though Thomas Jefferson and Ram Mohan Roy never met each other, they had the same mind. They did the same thing.
Jeffersonian Bible.
Exactly.
The-
Ram Mohan Roy did the exact same thing on
Ramohanian
the other
Bible.
side
Yeah.
of India, and
Yeah.
we have these classics where Indians, understood texts from outside India in their own way,
Sure.
right? And
That's the way of a text.
I think that's the way into the future,
All right.
right? Thank you. It's great talking to you. And
Likewise, yeah. I learned a lot. That's great.
Yep.
Yeah.